Although Vladimir Tarasenko's time in South Florida was very short while with the Florida Panthers, he blessed multiple lives during his day with the Stanley Cup.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, August 28th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News League. You follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix, and 3 times a week during the off season. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. So, Florida Panther fans, grateful to be back here once again on another edition of the show to once again celebrate the Summer of Champions that is for the Florida Panthers. And once again, it's going to be another episode filled with Stanley Cup content for you guys here on the show, and grateful to once again be doing another edition of the show with on a Wednesday with no other than Jacob Winans. Jacob, welcome back to the show for another edition of Winans Wednesday.
Awesome, thanks for having me. Topics today should be pretty fun, and we're getting close. We're getting really close to the start of the season. Opening night is 41 days away now. We're right around the corner.
Yep, 41 days. Stoli the goalie days away from opening night. So grateful to that we are getting one step closer. So before we get into the topics of segment number one, as part of the topics for segment number one, we're going to discuss Vladimir Tarasenko's day with the cup. But obviously, with photos being revealed at different times and what we find out about days with the cup, I want to continue discussing what we saw from Dmitry Kulikov's day with the cup too. And one of them was a few of them was him taking the cup to a marina. Another one was with past and former teammates on the golf course. But there's also this very iconic photo that he had of kind of a past and present with the Florida Panthers. And who is part of that photo? No other than Panthers legend Stephen Weiss. So when you look at this photo, Jacob, for if you're watching this on the YouTube from left to right, it's Aaron Ekblad, Ed Jovanovski, Dmitry Kulikov, and Stephen Weiss here. What comes to your mind when you see this photo, Jacob?
It's super cool to me because it's kind of like I almost look at this photo as like a bridge between eras. You've really got like 4 different generations of Panthers here. You've got Jovo, who is Panthers' first draft pick, if I'm not mistaken, second draft pick. Correct.
Second,
yeah.
Yep.
Second draft pick, but first overall in his draft. So Jovo is there. He's a Panther legend. You've got Aaron Ekblad, who's this current era, the champion era, if you want to call it that. And then you've got Stephen Weiss, who was in early 2000s. And then you've got Dmitry Kulikov, who was a mainstay in the early 2010s. So you've got these 4 different eras of Florida Panthers that are all celebrating the cup. And it's cool because Dmitry Kulikov is kind of like the bridge between them all. He's played with all of these guys in different eras of Panthers hockey. He was teammates with Stephen Weiss in the early 2010s, was teammates with Ed Jovanovski when Jovo was brought back and was named captain of the Panthers. And of course, he played with Ekblad back in when Ekblad was first drafted. They were teammates for Ekblad's first couple of years, and then now teammates again and Stanley Cup champions together. It's very cool to see Dmitry Kulikov kind of bridging the gap between these different generations of Panthers, which is awesome to see. It really speaks to this trophy and this Stanley Cup championship being an organization-wide accomplishment. It's not just this year's team; it's for the entire franchise, and anyone who's worn that Panthers uniform gets to be a part of it.
Yeah, and all four people in that photo are first round picks from the team. I mean, you think of right before Stephen Weiss where he dealt with his injury issues right before going to Detroit. Ed Jovanowski at the tail end of his career after being brought back to all those four teammates weren't teammates together, but also, like you said, bridging the gap between those multiple generations of Panthers. Like you said, looking at honoring the past and saying that you guys were a part of building this for where the current team finally got it done. But continuing the Stanley Cup conversation for the Panthers, another Russian player got their day with the cup in Vladimir Tarasenko. It was really cool that when he first came over to the Panthers, the discussion was like favorite parts of South Florida, and he gave a big shout out to Weston, just obviously 10 minutes from the arena. And we think about the a bunch of Russian players who love to train in South Florida. Evgeny Malkin is one of them too. And I remember Panther fans all over Twitter were hammering on trying to get him here, but that's besides the point. But it's crazy to think that with a guy like Vladimir Tarasenko, very short time with the Panthers, loves South Florida. It's obvious he wanted to stay, but obviously business is business here. But also the fact that the community meant so much to him, and even though he didn't really play for the team for long, he put an impact in his day with the cup by donating $10,000 to Broward Health too, and wanting to change so many lives there, and what that could do for so many people trying to get a cure for whatever they may be going through.
Yeah, and I think that's super cool, and it's a character move because he doesn't he hasn't played here. He didn't play here very long, but we do know that his family lives here. That he has multiple houses here, and all signs point to him retiring here and being part of this community. So being able to plant those roots and make an impact in that community, it shows that it's bigger than hockey, especially to a guy like him who means a lot to a couple different cities. He means a lot to St. Louis. He means a lot to the South Florida area now, and has won a cup in both places. But for him to do that as a trade deadline acquisition, a guy who wasn't here very long and obviously didn't re-sign for financial reasons. There are many guys who would see this as just a stop on their path and move on and not really have any ties or any roots, or even in the contract negotiation when the Panthers aren't able to make him the offer that he's worth, and they aren't able to keep him. There's no hard feelings. There's no bitterness towards the organization or towards the fan base or anything. It's been nothing but love and respect to him and from him, and I think this goes a long way in showing that as well. So I thought it was an awesome gesture from Vladdy, and also I think we're all really excited to see him in the community outside of hockey season, because him putting his name on the cup and now making himself a bigger part of the community. Doesn't matter how long he played here. He's always going to have this will always be a place that will take him in and make this his home.
Yeah, no doubt. And you think about the different projects that different players have, different initiatives, excuse me. Like, for example, Barkov with the Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital and having a suite for every game, too. So you think about for him, just for Vladdy, just making that impact right away for the organization. And once again, it's just going to be continued thing in the NHL where multiple guys during the trade deadline, if they have certain clauses, they're going to try to find a way to move themselves to Florida. I know Joe Thornton was a free agent acquisition for him, but he was watching it closely. And then you look at Claude Giroux saying nowhere but Florida, even though Colorado was in the race for trying to get Giroux, and then Vladdy, and for the Panthers not giving up too much to get him too. So I think I'm very excited for who else in the future will want to come to Florida and try to force their way. Not especially, and that was a thing for before Florida won, and now that they did, I mean, we kind of saw it in free agency too with the Nate Schmitz of the world too. So that's an example of a guy who just wants to be here. It's not about retiring now and ending your career here. So great to see that the impact of the community that Vladimir Tarasenko put with his donation of $10,000 to Broward Health. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we are going to continue our NHL goalie week conversation, and we're going to discuss where Sergei Bobrovsky stands regarding goaltenders since 2000 and another comparison between current 6 and with top goaltenders. We are going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. And Gametime has a feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live event even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And Gametime has the all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Seat views get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, and it's the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. And once again, I'd like to thank you guys for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Winans Wednesday edition of the show. And for your second listen, make sure you enjoy the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and local insights on every team, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Here once again with Jacob Winans here on another edition of Winans Wednesday. And Jacob, so once again, it's NHL goalie week here, and we want to obviously dedicate a whole segment to goaltending and some of the articles that have come out for goalie rankings. Obviously, this comes to no surprise that there's going to be an article related to it, and obviously the thing that I'm looking for is Sergei Bobrovsky content, obviously, which the Panthers put out some TikTok video the other day of Bob Brainrot, I believe it was called. So I'm not really too much into the TikTok game, but that's besides the point. But some of the goaltenders that Bleacher Report put out of goaltenders since 2000 and the company that Sergei Bobrovsky finds himself in, along with obviously Stanley Cup winners, but guys who have been getting close, and even guys who have been at the 1,000 game mark too. So Bobrovsky ranks number 5. 1 and 2 are Brodeur and Marc-Andre Fleury, the two guys that I spoke about who have reached the 1,000 game mark. And obviously in today's NHL, it's going to be a lot harder to get there, which is also why you see Roberto Luongo there on that list. So you think about the company that Bobrovsky's in, but also what's below him too are other guys who have been drafted high too for their respected teams too. But then you have guys who were late round picks, like a Henrik Lundqvist is up there who made it to a Stanley Cup final. But also the performance that you saw out of nowhere in 2012 with guys like Jonathan Quick winning the Conn Smythe in 2012, one of the best performances, and had a really great stretch there too. But finally, for Sergei Bobrovsky to get it done and having a middling for the middle part of the career being okay, but then this coming back to form, it just goes to show that there isn't an actual number when it comes to age, when it comes to goaltenders performing at their best, that it could be so voodoo with this position that, I mean, you look at Pekka Rinne making the Stanley Cup final later in his career after a long stint with Nashville too. It just goes to show the different journeys that each of these goaltenders have gone through to get to, even if they didn't get the accomplishment of winning, but to at least be a big impact on their team.
Yeah, and with Bob, it's such an interesting story with him in his career arc, because he was at one time the unquestioned best goalie in the NHL. And for even outside of those years where he was head and shoulders the best in the sport. He was always competing for either 1, 2, or 3, really, in the top goalie rankings. And for a while, it was him and Carey Price competing for Vezinas. It was him and Vasilevsky competing for Vezinas, and who's the best Russian goalie. There were these stretches where other goalies would come in and be the best, but Bob was always in that conversation. And despite that, he had this reputation as being a guy who couldn't get it done in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Then Columbus, the year Columbus takes Tampa out of the first round, that began to change, and then the move to Florida, and then everything just seemed to come crashing down as far as his game goes, which a lot of people questioned, and rightfully so. It made no sense because we were so used to just this dominant wall of a goalie that could carry a team and win games on his own. And typically when something like that happens, you don't see the turnaround and get back to form. Everyone immediately is talking about how this contract's going to haunt the Panthers. This is going to end in a buyout. He's never going to win. He's never going to get back to the Vezina level that he used to be at. And in most cases, you would expect that to be the trend. But Bob really proved that he's kind of not most cases. It's hard to explain. It's hard to understand because he completely turned it around and got back to form. And typically you don't see athletes do that as they get older. Athletes don't get back to their peak and get back to their prime as they age. And Bob seemed to do that, sort of defied Father Time a little bit. And we don't know how much longer he's going to play. Father Time catches up to everybody eventually. He's definitely on the back half, the final years of his career. That there's no question about that. But with all of those accolades and all of the stats and everything that he put up, he hadn't gotten the chance in the Stanley Cup final. He hadn't even gotten past the second round until last season, and it was over a decade in the NHL, and it was his finally being able to break through in the second and get through a second round and make that run against Vegas. And I feel like that kind of lit a fire under him. And if he was going to get another chance and if he was going to get back, he wasn't going to let that one go. And I think just the series against Edmonton sort of showed it was like his career arc in a series. The dominance through the first 3 games, it was the dominance of the first half of his career. The move to the Panthers was a downtime, and just like the 8-1 game and the struggles in the middle of that Edmonton series, and then it gets to Game 7, and you don't know if he's going to bounce back because it looks so bad right now. The same way we didn't know if he was going to bounce back and get back to his form after those couple of bad years to start his career with the Panthers, and then when everybody's doubting him, he pulls it off and gets back to the Bob that everybody knew. So it's really cool, and that's one of the things I love about sports is you see these big storylines, and it can be a storyline over a career, and then sometimes it's just a series, and the series tells the same story. And Bob has really solidified himself as one of the greatest goalies to ever play.
And it just goes to show that of not letting one stretch haunt you for if you're having one bad stretch, that how it could just go so differently. And you're thinking about just 8-1. I mean, at the same time with the Panthers giving up so many breakaways during that stretch. I mean, you're thinking about, thankfully for them, that they were able to assist their goaltender and just to play a lot tighter, for him to see pucks more, to react better to even if there's a slight screen in front of him too. So he's able to still have a little vision, move laterally too from post to post for him. So thankfully for him that he was able to get that done for him. And I mean, you mentioned different guys that he was competing with for Vezinas. I mean, Carey Price also won a Hart Trophy too, and they also got their contracts, even though Carey Price hasn't played in a few years, their contracts expire at the same time. So you were thinking about contract comparisons to what production they were getting out of it too at the time for them. So that's another, it's always just not looking at the individual, and sometimes always looking at other people. Well, he's doing this, but he's doing this. I mean, that's the nature of sports too. I get it, but uh, it but it happens whenever we have the expectation going in, and year one is just like, we got 6 more years after. And thankfully for him, he was able to ease his mind, go back to training, and also be prepared season in and season out. And it's not gonna be any different for him just because he won a Stanley Cup. And that's the great thing about his constant preparation. He stays in every moment, and that as a goaltender, you need to be. That's the place you need to be in. But we're gonna transition over to segment number 3, where we are going to discuss the reveal of the center ice logo for the Florida Panthers to commemorate the Stanley Cup. We are going to discuss that and more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Segment number 3 here on this Wednesday, August 28th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Wednesday edition of the show. And Jacob, before we get into the topic of center ice revealed, Sam Bennett actually was interviewed for TSN 1050, talking about his style of play, spending a lot of time in Ontario during the off season, and how he runs into a lot of Leafs fans, and obviously they're really mad at him after what happened in Game 2 of last year's series between the hit on Matthew Nyes that got him out of that game and the series. But also just goes, the comments were a lot of the times for him that he revealed saying, "I can't stand the way you play, but I want you to be a Leaf." And that's actually, if that man must feel so flattered hearing that from the people of his own hometown. And obviously the elephant in the room being the contract situation, which the people of the interview pushed in that conversation too. But also for Sam Bennett, it's just hilarious. And he also spoke about how it's a lot of the guys on the team that people don't like the way they play, but it just also goes to show what it takes to win, that you're going the extra mile to make sure that you make the opponent fear you. So when you hear that, Jacob, what was your reaction when you heard about that?
I think it's the perfect description of Sam Bennett's game. He's the stereotypical, you hate him if he's against you, but you do anything to have him on your team. And I think it's hilarious because he's become such a villain. And Toronto despises him. Boston despises him. All the talk about him and throughout the entire offseason is just about how they can't stand Sam Bennett, and they can't wait for next year because he's going to have to fight and drop the gloves. And at the end of the day, I don't think Sam Bennett cares about that in the slightest. I don't think Panthers fans or the Panthers organization cares at all, because Sam Bennett's not a guy who's going to run from anybody. And at the end of the day, you can't say he's not effective in what he does. It's perfect. It's something the Panthers missed for a very long time. Personally, if Sam Bennett wasn't a Panther and if he was a Leaf, or God forbid, a member of the Tampa Bay Lightning or something, I would hate him too, because he's so effective at what he does. He plays a physical brand. He plays on the edge. He's not a dirty player. I won't call him a dirty player, but he can be reckless at times. It's fine to acknowledge that he can be reckless, and he plays on the edge. And yeah, sometimes players aren't ready to handle that physicality. And I don't think he's a guy that's really not respected because of that, because at the end of the day, when he does do something that either crosses a line or injures a player or people take exception to it, he's not running from it. He's not a guy who's going to turtle. He'll drop the gloves. He'll fight anybody. And you can't help but respect that type of the game. And it's funny. It's just funny to hear that, because people hate him, people despise him, but if he was wearing their uniform, he'd be their favorite player.
Oh, no doubt. And obviously, take a step back from fighting in that Boston series because of the fact that he was still protecting that hand.
Of course.
Too. So those are a few exceptions that we will
opening. I wouldn't be shocked at all to see him drop the gloves early in that game and get it out of the way.
Yep, no doubt. But can't wait for that one. And we are going to see that more for sure. But one thing we are also going to see all season for the Panthers is their new logo at center ice. Which, funny enough, Jacob, because of course this happens. When I was discussing what I would like to see at center ice on Monday afternoon show, an hour later after posting, we find out what center ice will look like for the Panthers this season. So obviously we spoke about the trends of Vegas doing theirs. As I'm struggling to get the screenshot screen share at the moment, but we spoke about the Vegas Golden Knights and shit, and what they did for their cup celebration last year, and obviously what Toronto, what Vancouver and Ottawa were doing with their center ice logo too. But now we got it for the Florida Panthers, and if you're watching this on the YouTube, we have the two Stanley Cup logos at center ice from last year with Vegas, and this year for Florida too. So the Panthers obviously putting their shield there, Emirates Bank Arena around it, but then the top of the cup, the bird's eye view of the cup with it representing the sun rays from the Florida sun, along with the Panther logo too. With this one, obviously, this is better than the idea that I originally have, having the cup from top to bottom, and then having the shield on one side, and then the leaping modern Panther on the other, too. But I do have one thing that I would like to change about this one, but I'm going to give you the floor first on what you think about this design, Jacob.
Yeah, I personally, I absolutely love it. I think if you compare it, even in the side by side, you compare it to Vegas, I think Florida does it better. Might be slightly biased, but I like the Panthers color scheme here a little bit better in the way that looks, and also just you can't fault Vegas for this because it's their naming rights partner. But I just think the Emirates Bank Arena, the color and the font of Emirates Bank Arena looks better with the Panthers logo than T-Mobile does with the Golden Knights logo. And that's no fault of the team, but I think it's super cool, and I think it's really creative because it's taking a part of the cup that's not really doesn't really jump out at you. It's not visible to the eye when you look at the cup most of the time because it's from the inside of the bowl. So fans don't always see that pattern, and I think it's really a really unique take on that. So I'm a big fan of it. I think it's very South Florida. I think it's very, very flashy, very in your face. And yeah, I won't mind at all looking at this reminder of the Panthers being the champions. So gets a solid 9.5 out of 10 for me. I'm a fan.
And you look with the center ice logo, and you think about the letter H. Actually, when it comes to the red line, it actually matches really well. That it's not like completely blocking it off. I just realized that just now with this one, but in a way, for this one, I like that they show like the rays of the sun here for the Panthers, but for this one, I'd actually like to make a little bit of a change to make it more South Florida for this one. And it's I know the jet blue color had a lot of criticism as far as jerseys, but when you think about South Florida, and when you think about the fact that they're on the beach for their practice facility, all-star events when it was here was right on the water. So why not a little bit of representation of a light blue color around instead of that red in the background for at least that's the way I'm seeing it for this one, as far as like what would show more of South Florida to represent sun and water. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that'd be pretty cool if they had given some consideration to that. I would like that, and then I think it'd also just be kind of funny if you included some sort of reference to the beaches or the water of South Florida, especially given that the Panthers partied with the Stanley Cup in the ocean and
Which they
reportedly
weren't
were
allowed to do.
reprimanded for that and weren't allowed to do that, did it anyway. I think that'd be a pretty cool reminder of that. And obviously they wanted to go back to the shield logo on center ice. I saw a lot of people saying they would have preferred the leaping panther in this design. I feel like the shield actually fits this design better than the leaping panther would, but yeah, some sort of nod to the ocean or to the water or the beaches would have been pretty cool here. But yeah, side by side with Vegas, I think we've got them beat on the logo game. Never been a big fan of that Golden Knights honey mustard color. That's not my favorite color scheme for them. But we'll see. We'll see who the next champion is and what they decide to do with the center ice logo. And I hope this becomes a NHL wide trend. I think it's really cool. I think adds some character, some flair, some personality to the Stanley Cup champs. So let's see what the Panthers come up with next year when they go back to back.
What you said, and you said when. I caught that there. I think Vegas this year they're doing a poker chip for the center ice. I believe,
saw
if I'm
that.
not mistaken.
Yeah.
So that's also a really cool theme of Vegas. If they ever put center ice as the palm tree and the hockey stick too, I would love to see that, but I don't think they would ever go an alternate logo direction for center ice. But hey, you never know what they would try to pull there too, and just keep it themed to the city. And I know it's a lot of work if they were to just switch it over and over again too. So that's a lot of cost there for each team to do. But Jacob, I want to thank you so much for joining me once again on another edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, discussing Days with the Cup, where more goalie talk here as it's NHL goalie week in the NHL, and also our opinions on what center ice is going to look like this season for the Cats. So thank you, and tell everybody where they can follow you online, my friend.
Yep, you can follow me on X at JacobWinans8, and hang in there, ladies and gentlemen. We are right around the corner. It's almost time.
One step closer for sure. Thank you so much, my friend, and see you next week.
Awesome. Thank you.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Jacob Winans, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.